Welcome. What I'd like to do today is discuss the changing nature of organizations and the rise of the post-industrial leadership paradigm. Given global competition, challenging economic conditions, and the changing nature of the 21st century workforce, it's not surprising that the study of leadership in organizations has remained in the forefront of academic and popular literature. During the 1970s and 1980s, most theories continued to emphasize understanding the nature of the relationship between individual leaders and followers, even though increasing numbers of professionals actively sought more effective ways to structure and lead their organizations. Unfortunately, organizational development and human resource development experts offered little beyond classical trait or excellence theories that mistakenly classified good management as leadership. However, a group of theorists working since the 1980s offered new perspectives that not only challenged long-held assumptions and principles, but also fundamentally redefined our understanding of leadership. Joseph Ross' purpose in writing Leadership for the 21st Century is to review the literature on leadership, critique its shortcomings, and offer a new conceptual definition of leadership and present a new theoretical framework for understanding the leader-follower relationship. His book is theoretical in nature, rather than adding another learn-by-example book to be hawked in airport bookstores. Although the work is theoretical, his insights are uncommonly useful for practitioners seeking to lead excellent schools, districts, universities, and organizations. Ross' review of major theoretical models and definitions of leadership that have emerged between 1900 and 1990 represents one of the most comprehensive analyses of leadership theory in the field. His review adds a unique perspective that categorizes leadership studies and research. Perhaps most importantly, he offers a future-oriented new school of leadership that fits with the emerging organizational contexts. Ross' critique of the literature identified three fundamental problems that he feels must be overcome in order to advance the study of leadership: content and periphery, defining leadership, and developing a new school of leadership. Let's look at each one of these problems. First, let's look at periphery and content. Periphery. Most popular mainstream books focus on elements outside the periphery of leader-follower relations, including traits, personality characteristics, situational characteristics, greatness, group facilitation, interpersonal style, and management abilities. This knowledge base allowed practitioners to grasp something tangible to help define leadership and believe in effective behaviors. It also allowed researchers to feel good because concepts were developed using scientific methods. Content. Content focuses on what leaders need to know about a particular profession or organization in order to be influential in it. Thus, leaders became experts on theories, practices, human behavior, environmental stress, technical information, and stages of change. Content knowledge has always been more important to leaders than understanding how they and their followers relate to each other to achieve a common purpose. Consequently, leadership practice has been turned into a spectator sport by media, and what is trivial has become significant. Ross argues for de-emphasizing peripheral and content elements and concentrate on developing what is essential. He believes that we need a new relational paradigm. Second, defining leadership. The absence of a consistent definition of leadership has obvious implications for meaningful research in the field and practice. Ross criticizes the field because most authors don't define leadership or criteria for evaluating it. Consequently, when leadership means widely different things to different people, we really don't know or have a grasp on what we're talking about or even studying. To complicate this situation, words like leadership, leaders, and lead are often exploited as marketing tools and have also taken on mythical significance as savior of relationships, groups, organizations, and societies. For example, When things go wrong, people often say, what you need is a good leader. Third, the new school of leadership. The most interesting and unique element of Rost's criticism of the field of leadership is its lack of a single paradigm to frame the work of scholars and practitioners. He argues that the entrenched industrial paradigm of good management is leadership has permeated the field to the degree that rational management-oriented concepts have inhibited attempts to better understand leadership practice and theory. In his opinion, good management as leadership is revered because our capitalistic industrial society is viewed as integral to the achievement of our nation's success. Hence, it's a factor that we have to contend with. Rost, however, offers an antidote, the new school of leadership. It fits a post-industrial society and is defined as leadership is an influence relationship among leaders and followers who intend real changes that reflect their mutual purposes. As noted previously, the absence of an operational definition of leadership not only suggests that anything goes, but also begs the question, what do we really know about leadership? To answer this question, we have to take a look at commonly held assumptions about leadership theory. The field generally agrees with the categorization of leadership movements or the evolution of theories over time, including the 1900s, the great man theory, 1930s to the 1940s, group theory, 1940s to 1950s, trait theory, 1950s to 1960s, behavior theory, 1960s to the 1970s, contingency and situational theory, and finally the 1980s, excellence theories. These movements or theories have become part of the folklore of leadership studies, and we have learned to dutifully chant the names of our ancestors, as if they have great meaning. Rost's critical analysis of these theory movements suggests that the assumptions that progress is being made is not only inaccurate, but also may be an unfortunate aspect of our field's mythology. Rost lays out three inaccuracies associated with the idea of the evolution of leadership theory. First, progress. Commonly accepted descriptions of the theory movements in the field of leadership not only serve as an evolutionary narrative, but also communicate that great progress has been made. A critical analysis of this concept suggests that this may be more of a myth than a reality. Although we know more about leadership than we have previously, we need to develop a consistent definition of what leadership is and move it beyond dominant industrial paradigm. Although considerable credit is given to social psychologists and management theorists for developing theories of leadership, including great man theories, trait theory, behavior theory, contingency theory, and excellence theory, other fields including anthropology, sociology, history, music, drama, and literature have added to the notion of leadership. In addition, great man theories that were discredited in the 1930s were resurrected in the 1990s in the forms of excellence and charismatic leadership theories. Putting old wine in new bottles may not be good scholarship. The second inaccuracy is that theories are separate and distinct. Mainstream theorists present narratives that imply that theories are distinct and separate from one another, emerging at different times, and were reactions against the inadequacies of previously accepted theories. Thus, new and more sophisticated theories were offered to explain leadership. This may be misleading in that group theorists included traits in their explanations and prescriptions for group facilitation. Trait theorists look like great man caricatures in egalitarian dress. Behavioral theories were very group and trait oriented. Contingency and situational theories merely added a third dimension to their two-dimensional behavior theory. Excellence theories more or less integrate all previous theories in elitist contexts. Actually, great man and great woman theories were more prevalent in the 1980s than in the 1930s. In sum, all of these theories not only shared key concepts, but also reflect the industrial paradigm, are management-oriented, and structural functionalist in nature. In other words, they're hierarchical, linear, pragmatic, and focus on the leader to the exclusion of the follower. One deviant characteristic of these theories, however, is their penchant for face-to-face and small group relationships, when industrial paradigm emphasizes impersonal and bureaucratic relationships. The third inaccuracy is that theories dominated distinct periods in time. Accepted narratives suggest that each theory dominated a certain time period in the history of leadership studies and then disappeared after being discredited. In reality, some theories were popular during some periods, but in time, none became extinct. Many, in fact, remain useful. For example, most people operate in the industrial structural functionalist paradigm today. An analysis of leadership theories suggests that they reflect dominant management and social psychology frameworks. Consequently, alternative theories, those that speak with a different voice, are not included in the narrative. Hence, alternative leadership theories that emerged out of the work of anthropologists, historians, political scientists, and sociologists were unfamiliar to managerial and social psychologists and were not embraced. Although some industrial paradigm concepts that are managerial and excellence-oriented may be useful, they are limited in their relevance to developing a post-industrial new school of leadership that is transformational in nature. As I mentioned previously, the lack of a definition of leadership is central to the problem scholars and practitioners have had in conceptualizing and practicing leadership. The origins of the term leader was traced by Stockdill and others to its Latin and Anglo-Saxon origins. Interestingly enough, leadership is a rather recent term entering the English language in roughly 1300 AD. For example, from the Latin ducere, to lead, drag, guide, and conduct. The Old English term, leiden, to make go. Samuel Johnson referred to leadership as commander, introduced by going first. And Richardson in 1844 indicated that leadership was to go before, conduct, and induce. And Webster simply defined it as the capacity to lead. Rost examined the scholarly definitions of leadership. In fact, he identified 221 definitions in 587 books. It is evident that mainstream leadership or management concepts that prevailed through the 1970s reflected the industrial paradigm. During the 1980s, interest in leadership exploded. Analysis was conducted that produced 7 major frameworks. These frameworks suggest that during the 1980s, leadership focused on getting people to do more than was normally expected to transform the organization according to some criteria of excellence and effectiveness. Burns' idea of transformational leadership was co-opted by the industrial paradigm to mean deliver the goods. Great man, trait, group theories looked new because they assumed the language of excellence, charisma, culture, quality, vision, values, and even empowerment. But it was just old wine and new bottles. Good management is the 20th century's leadership paradigm. Although good management is an essential part of leadership, Ross notes that it is best suited to an industrial economy. Industrial notions of leadership help to make sense of an industrial era, but are no longer useful to scholars and practitioners who are involved in a paradigm shift that helps make sense of a post-industrial world. It is abundantly clear that Western society is in transition from an industrial to a post-industrial era, and that notions of leadership will change to fit these emerging circumstances. Rost offers a definition of leadership that captures all 4 critical elements. Element 1, the influence relationship. The influence process involves normative persuasion that includes reputation, prestige, personality, purpose, status, content of the message, interpersonal and group skills, give and take behaviors, and power resources. Influence relationships are multidirectional. and roles are interchangeable among leaders and followers. Importantly, influence patterns are non-coercive. In other words, they're not based on authority, power, or dictatorial actions. People in relationships are free to agree and disagree. Element 2. Leaders and followers are people in this relationship. It's not manager and subordinate oriented. This element includes concepts such as active followers. They're not passive. Active people are involved in the leadership process. Active people may fall along a continuum of activity from highly active to minimally active based on their willingness to be involved. Followers can become leaders and vice versa in any leadership relationship. Followers do not do followership, they do leadership. Thus, leadership is the sum total of all interactions of leaders and followers in a relationship, and it is not the individual interactions between one leader and one follower. It occurs within a community of believers. Element 3. Leaders and followers intend real change. Burns' notion of transformational leadership is extended in the post-industrial model in terms of accomplishing real changes. Thus, a relationship that is not focused on real and intended changes is not leadership. For example, leaders and followers intend changes that are purposefully focused on organizations or society. Real changes are substantive and transformative with regard to people's lives, attitudes, behaviors, and basic assumptions, and may involve groups, organizations, societies, and civilizations that they're trying to lead. Element 4. Leaders and followers develop mutual purposes. Mutual or common purposes emerge out of numerous influence relationships and interactions. They are not goals in the industrial sense that should be realized, but rather reflect their shared purposes. In sum, Rost made a clear distinction between management and leadership. He also notes that confusing or equating management and leadership has been pervasive in the mainstream literature since the 1930s and illustrates the dominance of industrial era thinking. Some attempts to distinguish between the two were made by Burns and others in the late 1970s that distinguish between power and leadership, influence versus mechanical compliance, management as focusing on routine matters, whereas leadership involves influence that guides the future state of affairs of the organization. Benison Nanas said, "Managers are people who do things right, and leaders do the right things." It's important to note that most human beings crave stability, predictability, and want to achieve goals. These qualities have defined successful organizations and effective management. Devaluing management in favor of leadership will have disastrous effects in our everyday world. In other words, good management and leadership are not mutually exclusive, but are complementary in the real world. Good management may create the conditions for transformational leadership if the manager is aware of the effect of management decisions on the organization and the people who inhabit it. People in positions of authority are compelled to act in an ethical manner. Ethics can be applied to both process and content, or means and ends, in human relationships. The term process focuses on means. It raises the question, does one ethically act in relations with others while attempting to influence them? The term content, on the other hand, focuses on ends or outcomes and raises the question, are the changes, decisions, policies, positions one supports morally acceptable? Basically, we have to answer the question, do ends justify the means? Leaders may use ethical means to achieve unethical ends, and vice versa. Consequently, they must pay attention to how they lead and for what purposes when they are engaged in relations with others. Manipulating subordinates using coercive and authoritarian means contradicts the notion of mutuality of purpose and consensus in the influence process. So, effective leaders have to avoid inherent contradictions in how they enact their roles. Poston notes that an ideal organization adds the autonomy and value of individuals who are the organization. It does not require individuals to sacrifice some of their integrity to belong to the organization. Thus, transformational leadership comes with an uplifting moral imperative. Rost has successfully posed an alternative post-industrial paradigm that fits emerging circumstances. If we look back, Chester Barnard observed that leadership has been the subject of an extraordinary amount of dogmatically stated nonsense. 60 years later, little has changed. Perhaps the most egregious indictment of scholars and popular writers is their inability or unwillingness to define leadership and make a clear distinction between it and management. It is evident that the field of leadership is faced with a world that is being dramatically transformed in ways that will eclipse industrial era norms and values, and emphasizes collaboration, common good, global concerns, diversity, client orientation, civic virtues, qualitative language and methodologies, substantive justice, and consensus-based decision-making. Taken as a whole, they will require a different post-industrial leadership paradigm that empowers people to transform how they view themselves, work, and society. Rost's work is grounded in an excellent review of the literature, and his post-industrial leadership paradigm has important ramifications on how we do leadership in the future. At this juncture, I'd like you to discuss the differences between management and leadership. Now, I'd like you to apply what you know to your own organization. Examine the forces that are changing the nature of the economy, society, and your organization to frame a discussion of leadership practices in your own organization and how they may need to change. Discuss leadership as a transformative process and examine how you may contribute to changing how people in your organization may contribute their leadership in engaging in real, change-oriented processes that reflect mutual purposes. I hope this brief review of Rost's work will stimulate your interest in the post-industrial leadership paradigm.